Shelling happening in and around Kyiv tonight following a Russian strike in the west of Ukraine on a fuel depot earlier today. Let's get the latest military developments with CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Layton. Colonel, appreciate you joining us once again to give us your perspective on this and to take us through the map there and the strategy. Ukrainians are fighting ferociously. Russian forces are largely stalled in several parts of Ukraine. Over a month into this war, just over a month into this war, what options does Putin have right now?
Well, that's a great question, Don. What we're looking at here is, of course, the area around Kyiv, which is right here, of course, and then you've got Kharkiv and you've got Mariupol. All of these areas are centers of fighting, and that is one of the biggest issues that they have. Where do they divide their forces and what do they do next? It seems as if the Kyiv battle is basically stalled out for Putin, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But when you look at Kharkiv and Mariupol, you have two very different scenarios fairly close to each other. Kharkiv, the Russians have not been able to move forward, even though Kharkiv is within 30 miles of the Russian border. Mariupol, on the other hand, appears to be in essence, a Russian victory at this point, and that's because the city is a complete wasteland, completely destroyed by the Russians. Over 90% of the buildings there are completely gone. This area right here in the south around Kherson, that's another area where the Russians had thought they could move in different directions, such as to the west or to the north of this. None of that is happening. It is, at least at this present time. So what we're dealing with here is Putin has to figure out what he wants to do next. And one of the possible things that he can do is divide the country, as you had been speaking about earlier. And that would mean something like this. Would go over to Russia, and that would be a possible solution to what the Russians are thinking, at least a temporary solution. But that is in a really short form how the Russians are looking at this. They are stalled out and they don't know which way they're going to go next, but their goals still remain the same, which is to topple the government in Kyiv. They're just going to take a longer time to get there.
Colonel, UK defense officials say the notorious Russian private military group Wagner has deployed to eastern Ukraine for combat operations. It's interesting because what does it mean that Putin is replacing dead generals and commanders with mercenaries?
Well, mercenaries are, of course, soldiers for hire. You know, they had them in the American Revolution with the Hessians, and they've been around throughout history. These guys are really notorious, though, and they don't really replace the generals or the colonels, but what they do is they provide terror for the groups that are here. They are soldiers that are not really ones who follow the rules of war. They're primarily deployed in this area right here in the eastern part of the country, as you mentioned. Their possible mission is to mop up what's going on in Mariupol and finish off the rest of the resistance there. They could potentially be used in other areas like Kharkiv and potentially in Melitopol and some of the other areas around here in the south. So they are going to be the group that would be used to do those kinds of mopping up operations, and they're known for their brutality, and that's what makes them particularly gruesome and not ones to mess with if you're standing there alone fighting these guys.
Oh, just awful. The Pentagon is deploying 6 U.S. Navy electronic warfare jets to Germany, accompanied by more than 200 air crew, pilots, and maintenance staff. Now, the planes can be used for radar jamming. So tell us about these jets. Could they be used to help Ukraine from NATO airspace?
Absolutely, they could be, because they have the range that would allow them to do what's called suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD in the military acronym. What they have is pods on the aircraft that provide jamming capabilities. They also have missiles that can be used to fire at targets if they're targets that are active, that are painting, as we call it, this particular jet or other jets in a package. These Navy jets are based on the FA-18, which is the basic airframe that we have here. But the jamming pods here are very important, because what they do is they go after enemy radar, and they make it hard for the enemy to figure out where Ukrainian assets would be at or NATO assets would be at. So they are a critically important asset. We use them all the time for our combat operations, and they could very well be used for Ukraine in this case.
Wow, that's some serious stuff there. That is, we learned a lot, as we do every night from you. Thank you very much, Colonel. Appreciate it.
You bet, Don.